Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another one of our pretty regularly weekly nowadays privacy chats. And I'm lucky enough this week to not just be chatting about the big news of the week, but to chat about some big ideas of perhaps the year. I'm delighted to have Arvind Narayanan, professor and somebody I've been a longtime fan of at Princeton University. I first became aware of Arvind in the days when he helped crack a leading de-identification challenge years ago, and have particularly appreciated over the years his deep work both in computer science and its policy and legal implications. There's lots of AI engineers and computer folks who suddenly are being forced to talk about AI and policy, and it can be both exciting to have some of these really thoughtful minds in the space, but also frustrating because there's years and years of learning from law, from policy, from history, from what did and didn't work. And not everybody comes in with a deeply grounded perspective in the cross-disciplinary domains. Cross-discipline seems to be one of the biggest challenges for people in policy, in academia. You know what you know well, and you don't always fully appreciate, and suddenly you're an expert on ethics because you're talking about ethics and you're not aware of the incredible history in the space. So deeply have appreciated Arvind's books. We're going to start, and also joined by Stacey Gray, who leads our AI work here at FPF, and she'll have some thoughtful challenges and questions. So Arvind, let's start. The AI Snake Oil book is out, and now you've put out sort of a long thought through article that is going to clearly evolve into a book and is sort of setting the stage. And this second book, AI as Normal Technology, seems to be in large part sort of built on the AI as snake oil. So if I didn't know a lot, and I assume some of the folks in this audience who are broader law and policy and maybe not as steep are going to assume that AI is snake oil. Okay, this is kind of just another critic of, all the bad things and the frailties and ridiculous outcomes that we sometimes see in this world of AI. But you're not actually a skeptic, I think, of AI's, potency and its game changer and its, incredible challenge to society. And I'd say you are, an optimist, but somebody who, deeply sees the incredible value and risks that it's going to bring. But you've labeled the book AI as snake oil, and that sort of sends a message. So are you, do you see your role as everyone in business and in the media is talking about AI? We got to compete with the world and compete with China and come up with, magnificent new ways to deal with society and stop extinction. And so you need to point out sort of the snake oil because here's how it actually doesn't do all those things. Or there's more nuance, I think, to your perspective. So hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jules. Appreciate that. And this is something we often get. I should clarify that the title of the book is not AI as Snake Oil. The title of the book is AI Snake Oil. And the subtitle is something like, I forget the exact subtitle, but it's like where AI works, where it doesn't, and how to tell the difference. And that really is the theme of the book. And I know a lot of folks have pigeonholed us just from reading the title and not even the subtitle. It is what it is. I understand that's normal. There are so many books out there. We don't have time to read all of them. Anyway, with that out of the way, the nuance in the book is that AI is not one technology. It's an umbrella term. It refers to a collection of loosely related technologies. And these are things like predictive AI, so AI that's used in criminal justice, used in hiring, used in healthcare, and so forth. AI that's making consequential decisions about people based on predictions of what they might do in the future, who might commit a crime, who might do well at a job, who might pay back a loan, who might drop out of school. And the core logic in all of these applications is that we're going to basically prejudge people and make decisions about them that often deny them life opportunities based on a machine prediction of what they might do in the future based on similarities with what other people have done in the past, right? So it's that kind of flavor of AI that's used in automated decision making that we're particularly critical of in the book. When it comes to generative AI, we acknowledge at every opportunity that this is a rapidly advancing technology. It is very useful to virtually every knowledge worker. We use it all the time. We are critical of AI companies for the haphazard way in which they've released this technology. We say in the book that it's as if everyone in the world has been simultaneously given the equivalent of a free buzzsaw, because there are so many misuses that are possible. There haven't been enough guardrails. And also, while this is a powerful technology, the reason there has been so much hype around it is that people are drawing too quick a line between AI capabilities and its usefulness in the real world. And a lot of that is based on a flawed analysis of benchmarks, flawed claims by technologists who don't understand the business context, the regulatory context, et cetera. So we say a lot of that in AI snake oil, and that's really where AI as normal technology picks up. Yes, the technology, especially when it comes to generative AI, is advancing rapidly, but it's not going to have immediate impacts on the world. There are a lot of things that need to happen to realize its impact. We have agency in determining how all of that is going to go.
Well, can we push back for a second? And Stacy, as we were talking in advance, was sort of maybe starting to raise this. You sort of make the point that there's this development of core technology and models but what actually happens between the latest model and then people actually using it in actual applied ways are two very different things. One of the major big tech CEOs was well quoted as this is going to be like electricity, and everyone sees that as this was this game-changing thing, and obviously it was. But your argument is that it took quite some time actually before that happened, and that initially, you even note that factories, didn't find efficient ways to use electricity until many years later. The entire system was designed in very different ways that took advantage of the fact that you now could have, available power in this way. But it does seem like there's impact. Just, take your university environment, right? Like, it seems like very, very, very immediately students grabbed, use, and academics grabbed use. And the relationship between how you teach and judge and maybe, get admitted to schools in terms of writing essays and that sort of thing is immediately, in no time, going to have to change. So are you, are you, and look, Wall Street, they get it wrong, but, there's a lot of smart people out there driving stuff. The big tech companies, get it wrong, but there's a lot of, isn't this being diffused more rapidly than perhaps you're giving credit for?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the pushback, and this is very commonly something that people disagree with us on. But I do think the data actually strongly back up our position, and let me explain why. So two major things. One is I think a lot of the numbers on rapid diffusion are being kind of wildly misinterpreted and exaggerated. So a good example is this. There was this study last year that made waves for saying that 40% of US adults are using generative AI, and that was just 2 years after ChatGPT had been released. And this is much more rapid than past waves of technology adoption, the paper claimed. In fact, the title of the paper was The Rapid Adoption of Generative AI. However, what most people didn't pick up on is that in this 40% figure, that includes even someone who may have used ChatGPT, once a week to write a limerick or something like that. So when we look at the quality of adoption, which I think economists call the intensity of adoption, a very different picture emerges. What this paper found is that roughly order of magnitude, it's like 1 hour per week in terms of work hours that people are using generative AI. In terms of what that's adding to labor productivity is very, very small. It's a tiny percentage point. I forget the exact numbers, but it's a very different picture from how people are interpreting the speed of adoption. And I did some calculations, and we argue in our paper that this is actually not necessarily faster than PC adoption. It's not clear that the rate of technology adoption is going up. There are, yes, some exceptions, such as students using it overnight to cheat on homework. And we do make the point, actually, in the intro of the AI Snake Oil book, that misuses of this technology are often a lot easier and faster than productive uses. And there's a very specific reason for that. And that reason is that the reason that adoption generally tends to be slow is that all of the things that we talk about when it comes to responsible AI and compliance and regulation and all of that, those are the things that slow things down, which bad actors are not constrained by. And that's exactly the reason we take the AI companies to task for, just putting it out there to everyone all at once instead of developing concrete applications that can be used in specific industry sectors with guardrails around them from the moment of release. And so I think this rapid adoption is partly because of misinterpreting statistics, partly because of this irresponsible release model where it's been made available to everybody. When in fact, when you look at what it takes to turn it into a product that you can generate economic productivity benefits from, that's a much slower process.
Look, it does seem clear by the fact that Google and others followed so quickly, is that clearly the capabilities were, in the ballpark, and what business impact that might have for Google search, or what, risks of putting out a chatbot that yells racist things and so forth. There were clearly lots of legal and policy people in our community who were, you can't do this. And for whatever, better or worse, OpenAI, plunged forward, and then there was no stopping, everybody and anybody. But, gosh, when I started 20 some odd years ago, websites were pretty crappy. AOL was sort of the world, and everybody was super excited. And then it got pretty deflated. Hey, commerce is actually pretty hard. And the ad tech market crashed. Eventually, of course, this all happened pretty quickly. Mobile, I remember when I was at AOL, we were buying these like mobile companies, and you heard about these devices in Japan that just did so much more than in the US, but every mobile app and site and so forth was unusable, and but all of a sudden, very rapidly, mobile, right? I don't know the exact day from the first smartphone to mobile somehow defining our lives, but it was pretty quick. So, is this just a matter of a year or 2 years versus 10 versus 50? I mean, just how ahead of reality do you think sort of the policy noise is? Does it really matter AGI, which you've also sort of been critical of as sort of being a relevant benchmark? I think you clearly make the case that it doesn't really matter when someone ticks the box of AGI. What might be some of the markers that you would say are really indicative? Is it, when people start being laid off in giant numbers because AI is really replacing workers? And how far off is that? I mean, it's hard to predict, but are you, what are the implications of guessing wrong here and moving too quickly on either maybe banning regulation because we don't want to freeze progress, or moving too quickly to regulate when we don't know where it is? I mean, are you simply sort of staking out an optimal guess based on, looking at the evidence from a more rigorous point of view than just sort of the market news? Your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. There's a lot in that question. Let me try to take it piece by piece. So first of all, I don't think we should be guessing. I don't think we should be looking at these capability curves and try to guess how rapidly societal changes might happen. We should be doing a lot more measurement. And it's unfortunate how little of that is happening. While there is a lot of money flowing into evaluating these technical capabilities, how quickly these benchmarks are getting beaten, and also AI safety benchmarks. Can these models escape from containment or whatever, which in our view are irrelevant questions to be asking. There's not nearly enough high quality measurement on how many people are using this technology day to day and what is the nature of that use. And similarly, when it comes to safety, instead of capability, how are bad actors actually using this technology, right? So there's not enough research funding of measurement. There's not enough transparency from companies. So a lot of these companies know how their models are being used by bad actors for various bad things, and they have occasionally released blog posts and stuff. But I think there needs to be far more transparency. That started happening with social media over a period of years, where it became the norm, and then later also the law for companies to have to release transparency reports. We do think that generative AI companies should also be releasing transparency reports. There are some efforts to improve this, such as the Foundation Model Transparency Index out of Stanford, and also some folks at Princeton. But I think we're a long way from having actual metrics that can tell us the things that matter, like adoption for productive uses as well as misuses. And then a final thought on your point about isn't smartphone adoption rapid, et cetera. Look, I mean, whenever we're living through technological change, it's always going to feel rapid. But my question is, rapid compared to what? If the claim is that it's more rapid than previous waves of technology adoption, I'm not at all convinced. Like a century ago, radios went from nearly 0% of households to almost 100% of American households in something like 8 years. And it's not clear that smartphone adoption is any faster than that. And so while there always is a challenge for policymakers when it comes to regulating new and emerging technologies, I don't think we're in an unprecedentedly challenging situation. I think the challenge is much more due to sclerotic processes in policymaking, such as notice and comment that takes years and recently has been criticized. Some of the processes have been criticized as a vetocracy, as folks might know. So it's those institutional challenges in policymaking that I think are the real things that are slowing things down, as opposed to technology acceleration being the real issue.
So I want Stacy to jump in, but before she does, we sort of focused a bit on your point about sort of the timing and that people going a little bit too ballistic and excited because of a misguided sense of how quickly real impact is going to happen. But I think many of the other key points that are relevant both for kind of compliance and governance people or policymakers, are embedded in this paper as well. So can you share a couple of the other sort of, here are some of the takeaways. You make one, key point that regulating the models, or at least an over focus on the models, is sort of silly. It's like saying, hey, computers shouldn't be used for bad purposes. Really focus a bit more on the applications and what people are actually doing. But can you share a couple of the other sort of key, here are the takeaways for a chief privacy officer, someone in AI governance, or a state or federal legislator, perhaps?
Yeah, definitely. So the framework in the paper that we use to think about this is we draw from the classic diffusion of innovations theory, and then we elaborate it and adapt it to AI. So our process has 4 stages. There's invention, which is models getting more capable. There's innovation, which is those model capabilities translating into products, whether an AI-based image editor or, let's say, in legal tech, AI that can help in the discovery process to find documents more efficiently, whatever, right? It really depends on the sector. The third step is adaptation, early adaptation, users starting to experiment with this, getting comfortable with this new technology. The fourth, last, and hardest step is adaptation. Rather than adoption. Okay, so what happens in adaptation is institutions, organizations overall need to, in some cases, structurally change to optimally take advantage of this technology. Business models might need to change, the structure of the firm might need to change, laws and norms, et cetera, might need to change. Just one example from just last week is even the simplest application, like a customer service chatbot, companies have been very reluctant to deploy because the chatbot might give people wrong information and they might get sued, and the company might be held liable for what the chatbot made up, which famously happened to Air Canada a couple of years ago. So now one innovation in risk management that has come out of this is insurance for the errors that generative AI products might make. And so there's a new startup that's offering that kind of insurance. So this is what I mean by adaptation, right? In some cases, laws might need to be clarified, governance might need to change, business models might need to change. And it's that slowest step that's going to matter a lot from a regulatory perspective as well, because regulation can and should focus on those steps of adoption and adaptation, because that's where really the choke points are. That's where you can more easily put guardrails, as Jules pointed out, as opposed to in the model development stage, which I think is a lost cause to try to slow down through regulation. And secondly, regulation actually helps to help industry more confidently diffuse AI, because without necessary guardrails through regulation, there's too much uncertainty, too much risk for companies. So it can actually be a win-win. And we give many specific ideas in the paper for what that diffusion promoting regulation could look like.
Stacy.
Thanks, Jules. I don't want to sort of continue beating the drum too hard on diffusion, since you said that's sort of a point where most people have disagreed with you, and maybe you've kind of heard it all before. But the comparisons just don't resonate with the kind of lived experience that I'm seeing, and that I'm seeing in the workplace and among thought leaders, and particularly teachers. So each of the comparisons that you've made around electricity or radio or internet have some individual economic cost associated with kind of signing up and getting the benefit of this thing. And with the very advanced forms of generative AI analytical tools that are available now, there's not necessarily any cost, and there's not necessarily any organizational or institutional barrier. So when you compare to things like older predictive analytics tools being used in the criminal justice system, my counter would be there's nothing stopping right now a federal trial judge or prosecutor from uploading thousands of documents into a system and saying, please give me a suggestion about whether this person is guilty or not, or what I need to know in order to make that conclusion. And one of the other things you've written about is cognitive offloading. We've seen some studies coming out about this, and compared to kind of the benefits of light bulbs or radio or communication or instant communication, how do you measure the benefit of, or if it is a benefit, of cognitive offloading? Because it strikes me that that's going to be so addictive and so tempting for most people that, my example of a federal trial judge using AI in this way might seem a little hyperbolic, but I don't see why a person wouldn't do something like that, just based on my own experience and what I'm seeing amongst knowledge workers. So thoughts, reactions on the kind of cognitive offloading piece.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate the pushback and the disagreement, which is interesting, because I want to make a meta comment. The fact that I would say, actually profoundly disagree on this really fundamental point really speaks to how little data we have on these things. If a fraction of the money that we're going into these, frankly, silly capability benchmarks, we're going into more detailed measurements of how often trial judges are doing this, we would be in a much better position to have this conversation, right? So the reason my intuition is very different is that yes, there is no monetary cost, or very little, to accessing these models, but that's not the real cost. That's not the cost we're pointing out in the paper. The cost is reputational. If you get found out, it's a very bad thing, and that has happened so many times to lawyers. Those lawyers have been sanctioned by the courts, and that has led to a change in their behavior. And so in many cases, in many of these sectors, we're seeing an initial overexcitement for people to start using these models. But once those reputational costs become clear, and once the backlash becomes clear, there is a correction process. So I'm considering all of that, the second order effects, et cetera, when I say that adoption has been slow and will continue to be slow. But again, it's important to have data to have a better discussion about this question. So to your point about measuring sorry, Jules, did you want to jump in?
No, I want to bring in a couple of questions as soon as we have a chance from our active audience.
Yeah, so I'll just very quickly say, Yeah, measuring the benefits of cognitive automation, I think the benefits are potentially huge. So once again, I'm going to go in this case based on my lived experience because again, I don't have data. The thought I want to give is that the current metrics here, in this case, it's not even that people aren't doing the work of measurement, but that the metrics that people are using, even when they do the measurement, are not necessarily the right ones. So for me, as a heavy user of generative AI in my research and programming and so forth, the biggest benefits are things like it makes programming more fun and removes a lot of the drudge work from programming. And this is something I've heard from many people, consistent with my experience as well. It allows me to take on more ambitious projects in many cases than I otherwise might, because I know that if I get stuck, I have generative AI as a potential fallback that might help me get unstuck, even though it might not always work. Those are things we need to figure out what are even the right metrics for. So I think we're quite a ways from being able to actually quantify the benefits of cognitive automation, even though I suspect that they're quite significant.
Yeah, I'm eager to see what, like, vibe coding, like the idea that people who aren't software engineers may suddenly be able to do far more coding possible. I've got an idea for a website that I want to build, and the crappy tools that I use now look, like they're 20-year-old blogs. And so I'm eager to see, what I can do. Alice Schwartz says that Arvind has been critical of AI safety voices in some manner in the AI snake oil. Has your perspective on AI safety changed? If so, how?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes and no. So my perspective hasn't changed in the sense that I think a lot of the claims that AI safety is an urgent existential risk for humanity that policymakers should be urgently acting on, we continue to believe that those are overblown. And in fact, AI as normal technology elaborates greatly on our view in AI snake oil that those risks are overblown. The way in which my view has changed is that in the past, my approach to this has been to say, this is silly, this is distracting us from the present day harms of AI. I don't think that's a useful approach. I think these are very reasonable people who have good reasons to make the claims that they're making, and they're not doing this just to hype up their products, as some people have claimed, and I have claimed sometimes in the past. I have moved away from those views now, and I do think it's really important to have a respectful dialogue among people who are concerned and skeptical about AI safety. And more recently, I've had the opportunity to be part of many of those dialogues, including with the authors of AI 2027. And I look forward to being part of more of those discussions going forward.
To those asking for a link to the paper, Adrian has posted it, but just to state it for those who are driving and listening and like AI as normal technology, you can find it both at the Knight Columbia site, where I think it was initially posted, but also if you follow AI Snake Oil, you not only can catch up with this article, but a more recent one where, which I assume will be part perhaps of the book, that looks a bit at the AGI as sort of being this important, relevant, or critical point. And I think Arvind makes some thoughtful questions about, like, what are we judging, and does it really matter? And maybe if AGI isn't the right answer, and I've only skimmed that article, so apologies. If AGI isn't the right benchmark, I guess the notion was that AGI was an important benchmark because it meant AI would, start, doing some set of things that were smarter than us. What is the right benchmark? And Stacy pointed out just a little bit earlier that Anthropic yesterday or the day before released some interesting information about one of their new models, which has access to people's previous emails and so forth. And evidently, what was the model was going to blackmail an engineer.
This was something from the model card of the latest iteration of Claude released yesterday by Anthropic. One of the safety risks that it flagged was that apparently they've been testing it on hypothetical, like fictional sets of emails, and telling it that the system was going to be shut down, and observing that Claude, relative to other models, apparently this is something I didn't know, relative to other models is more likely to exhibit behavior that looks deceptive and manipulative. In this case, blackmailing one of the engineers with the fake emails. An interesting wrinkle of the safety considerations of that. there's so much buzz around things like this every single day. I wasn't sure how seriously to take this one, but it stuck out to me as interesting.
So if it's not AGI, that is sort of this everything changed benchmark. We need to chain these things down better or something. What would you? Is there a better kind of? Is it a more nuanced set of different little risk factors? Hey, it can allow some individual person to build an actual rocket ship, or that they can use in a bad way. What would the better metrics that we should worry about be?
Yeah, I like that you asked what are the better metrics. If we ask what is the right benchmark, as many AI researchers are asking, I think we've already lost. We're not asking the question even the right way. And we talk about this in the paper. Better metrics are things like uplift studies, which are kind of randomized controlled trials where a person does or does not have access to a tool. And then we try to deeply understand how well and how quickly they can do a particular task, whether it's a productive task or a dangerous task, and various kinds of adoption statistics. Those are the metrics that we need that get more at the diffusion aspect, how AI is integrating into various different sectors in society, as opposed to these standalone, purely technical capability benchmarks.
And in particular, the performance benchmarks suffer from kind of a problem around a term I learned recently, which is Goodhart's law, which is as soon as the metric itself becomes the goal and companies start designing for it, which we've seen in the last couple of months, it loses its utility as a metric. And it seems like that's something a lot of the current benchmarking is susceptible to.
Yeah, exactly right.
Arvind, can you tell us as we wrap up where so AI is normal technology set sort of the stage? You now took a look at AGI. You probably are working on the next step here. Where are you going to be going sort of deeper or building on as you build out this whole set of ideas into a bigger book?
A few things we're looking at are, one example is claims that AI is going to revolutionize science, automate science, cure cancer, fix climate change, and so forth. I think there's certainly huge potential for AI in science. We're working on some AI tools for scientists ourselves, but these claims of revolution are often based on a misguided understanding of what the hard part of science is, and we'll be talking about that in future writing. We're also looking at implications for society. So recently, for instance, we've been thinking about why the use of chatbots as a way to summarize, synthesize information, search for things is contributing to the decline of reading. So what does that mean if people are losing critical reading skills? What does that mean for the foundations of democracy? And so rather than catastrophic AI risks, generally the things we worry about are what are the subtle ways in which this technology might chip away at some of the foundations of technology, but also help shore up some of those foundations. And that's a broad theme of a lot of the thinking that we do.
So final thought, I've been a fan for a long time of Professor Norman Sudda's work on, I guess, what I'd call a agent of sorts that helps users make all the changes you might want to make to your Android phone to lock down all the different privacy settings, because there's so many, and the nuance of what somebody really would want and what they really think they want is so complex. So really cool work, very, very early. Your co-author on this paper, Sayash Kapoor, with some other writers, has a paper out on what would it take for AI agents to actually be agents for users instead of agents for platforms that are working for users to let you do things that they would like you to do, like buy tickets and that sort of thing. And I only started glancing at it, but I just thought of the debate of all these years of like the people who hate using the big commercial email services because they think, of all the concerns of someone else, filtering your email, blocking spam based on their giving the government. And you really ought to run your own email server, right? And most of us don't, even if we could, because, it isn't worth the fuss and the trouble. Is there some hope that there's actually going to be AI on my side jousting with these other AIs out there or empowering users? I mean, I don't know, the overhead may be different here because I've got the cloud and I've got the tools. I don't know. Welcome your thoughts as to whether or not AI might actually end up being a usually individual empowering tool given its capabilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. And by the way, a quick historical note, this vision goes way back 25, 30 years back. In the late 90s, there was a whole wave of companies called vendor relationship management, infomediaries, et cetera. They were trying to build versions of these things, even though, AI in a modern recognizable form wasn't around back then. But yeah, those dreams have come back because of the improvements in the capabilities of large language models. And yes, there is some potential that we're going to have agents acting on behalf of users as opposed to on behalf of companies. And that's what the paper that Sayash co-authored gets at. I think, we're never going to, just like we're never going to sleep with our money under our mattress instead of putting it in a bank, right? So we're never going to be in a world free from companies that are building these products for us and all of us, building things for ourselves, running our own email server. That's never going to happen. The risk-benefit trade-off is just not there for the vast majority of people. However, what can happen is that our platform providers, whether it's, our the iOS and Androids of the world, or the browser vendors or whatever, integrating agents into their platforms, basically enhanced versions of Siri and Alexa and so forth, that are in fact, to some degree, acting on behalf of the user. They will also act on behalf of the company, unfortunately, but nonetheless are an intermediary layer between the user and various commercial entities that they might interact with. And that would be, something we can both reasonably hope for and would be reasonably pro-consumer, in my view.
To those posting comments, I'm sorry we haven't gotten to them. We're out of time. Let me just suggest that I think the article answers and addresses many of them. So take it on as your weekend reading, or upload the link to your favorite LLM and ask for a detailed summary. I did that, and I think it did a pretty darn good job, but it was worth reading myself as well. So thank you, Arvind. Look forward to your continued ideas in this space. Thank you, Stacy, for joining me. If you don't yet have AI Snake Oil, you should. Critical book for your shelf and your reading, and do catch up with the regular newsletter where Arvind and crew put out their updates, including this article. Thanks. Hope to cross paths soon. Good
Thank
weekend,
you,
everyone.
Thanks for having me. This was a fun discussion. Have a great weekend.